Okay. I haven't seen him yet.
He hasn't showed up yet, but he's on the cards.
Now, Beto was elected. Beto is from Texas. You two are from Texas. You two are from Texas. When was he elected?
He's a second term.
He's now second.
And what term are you in? I lasted 9.
Yeah, I'm starting to wonder. When you start wondering, I know.
I was ready. If you want to, what are we doing here? We did our board.
We're actually hosted one before.
On Wednesday, hello.
Yeah. We're only allowed to do one publication. We've got so many publications.
But this is
Somebody tell Meg, I want to mention, this is the latest one. I want to mention this in my remarks to the board. To the board, I'll give Chris all the credit. No, I won't.
Their friendly rivalry benefits me. I like that.
Someone else said something nice about it.
I'll say something nice about you.
So, is this in Spanish or English?
A little Tex-Mex here.
So I was at the downtown.
Paso Texas got shut down actually. Yeah, yeah, she's in here.
All right, because she said, I said, are you working on Wilson? And she said, not so much. And I said, oh, yes.
Hey, we're waiting for
You know, yeah, he's take a picture stuff, so I think we just gotta go for it.
Wait, send it to me. Here, hold on. Don't take a picture just with my hand. Ever since he lost that jalapeno eating contest, he hasn't been the same.
To a guy from Washington State.
To a guy from Derek Kilmer. Can you believe that? That's good.
You're not as good a coach. Yeah, the border caucus, you just lost everything.
Oh, yeah, it's kind of hilarious.
You gotta go, right? I know, that's why I wanna make sure we get started,
Yeah.
just so you have your time. Diputada. Oh, desde aquí. Y todavía nos hace falta el representante Vargas, pero el representante Cuer tiene que irse a las 9:30. Entonces vamos a estar un poco apurrado de hacer todo. Oh, okay, aquí está. De hecho,
sí, mañana sí. Con más tiempo.
Porque voy a poder platicar para que me diga, como ya está platicando con el Vicente,
Sí.
pero platicamos.
¿Conoces al famoso congresista? So mañana, con tiempo.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is your third and final call to take your seats. Thank you so much. Good morning. My name is Duncan Wood. I'm the director of the Mexico Institute here at the Wilson Center. I'm delighted to see so many friendly faces out in the audience, so many people who believe very firmly in the importance of working on and promoting the image of the U.S. Mexico border here in Washington. We're delighted to launch a new report produced by my colleague Chris Wilson and Eric Lee. Eric, where are you? There we are. Thank you. Over here on the right. Fabulous report that focuses on some of the findings from a series of conferences that were held down on the border last year with the support of the Council of State Governments West. And I'd like to recognize Edgar Ruiz and Marta Castañeda, who have been such great colleagues and friends of ours throughout the years. Thanks for all your support on that. We want to get... Yeah. I am going to quickly move along and invite the president of the Wilson Center, Jane Harmon, to come up and say a few words and to recognize the distinguished luminaries that we have here with us on the podium. Thanks very much, Jane.
You're a luminary now. Morning, everyone.
Morning.
Morning.
Good morning. Buenos dias.
Buenos dias.
When I heard that we were doing a program with 3 members of Congress, I decided I had to get here because Congress is very challenged and they need all the support they can get. So I'm here to say something nice about the United States Congress after I say something nice about the Wilson Center. First of all, many of you know that I am a recovering politician. I served in Congress for 9 terms from California. I left 4 years ago for a better job right here as president and CEO of the Wilson Center. And we have been doing marvelous work thanks to Duncan and Chris, right over here, Chris Wilson, and Andrew Seeley, the founding godfather. I don't know what happened to him. Oh, there he is. We promoted him or demoted him to executive president of the Wilson Center after his 10 years of stellar service in basically inventing and building our Mexico program, which most view as the best U.S. Mexico program on the planet. But let me make a couple of other points. First of all, the title of this report is the U.S. Mexico Border Economy in transition. Something we say here all the time is that Mexico is still misunderstood. There is a very positive story about Mexico, and it has to do with the economy. And the border economy is a huge part of the Mexican economy, and oh, by the way, P.S., of the U.S. economy. So cross-border flows, joint manufacturing, all the ways in which we have built a platform, a North America platform, not with just Mexico and the U.S., but Mexico, U.S., and Canada. We have a Canada Institute here, too, is a huge part of the U.S. success story. And President Obama's rolling out a budget that shows an improved U.S. economy. Well, guess what? Part of that reason for an improved U.S. economy is an improved Mexico economy. So that's what I have to say about this report. About the Wilson Center, in case anyone missed it, about 2 weeks ago, the ratings came out. There's a University of Pennsylvania rating service for think tanks, and we are now in the top 5 U.S. think tanks, up from number 11 when I came here. But it's all about, it takes a village. And we're also in the top 10 world think tanks, and for the second year in a row, we are the number 1 U.S. think tank to watch. So watch this program. Now about my friends from Congress. I used to say that I escaped from the asylum. They have escaped for an hour so that you can see them. The one I worked with longest, he served in Congress for 6 terms, is Henry Cuellar, who is really superb, and who, as a Texan, gets the Mexico border issues, I think, better than anyone, and has been fearless to be out there with Democrats and Republicans. I think he used to be a Republican. No, he never was a Republican. Oh my God, I'm sorry.
Whoa.
That was
My middle initial is R for Roberto, not Republican.
Henry Roberto. Has been fearless and works with anyone who wants to solve problems, which is what we do at the Wilson Center. And then we have Beto O'Rourke, also, that's an interesting Texan-Mexican name, but there he is, also from Texas. And then we have Juan Vargas. Hello, Juan, from my home state of California, also in the southern part of the state, the better part of the state of California, and where we have, obviously, a huge number of Mexicans, Mexican-Americans, Latin Americans, and so forth. I have sometimes called Los Angeles, where I come from and where I'm still a resident, North Mexico. And I grew up in a it was then not a majority-minority city, but it is now, and it's very proud of its cultural heritage from the South. And you can't really think about, in Los Angeles, you can't think about the economy there or the culture there or the future there without understanding Mexico. So that's enough of me. I just, and I assume Chris will introduce everyone else, but about Chris, he has been a major driver behind the impressive reports we've put out there, picked up everywhere, quoted everywhere. Chris is quoted everywhere. This is good. And Chris took me on my own private tour of the Carlos Slim Museum in Mexico City. Just want you to know. And he is really good on Mexican culture. And it's a real gift to Mexico that Carlos Slim paid for that museum, and admission is free. So admission here is free too, and we have an intellectual candy store here, and we're glad you've all come to enjoy one of our latest flavors. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Jane. We're also delighted to have with us the chair of the Border Legislative Conference and also a member of the Nuevo León State Legislature, Diputada Imelda Guadalupe Alejandro de la Garza. Diputada, I am very happy that you're here. We have, because of some of our members of Congress have some of their hearings and other sessions, their committee work that they need to get back to. If you don't mind, forgive me, but I'm going to pass the microphone first to Congressman Cuellar, and maybe we can just switch the order of the presentations a little bit here. Thank you very much. So, Congressman Cuellar, take it away. Your mic should be on.
Okay.
Feel free to make remarks from here or the podium.
Chris, thank you so much. And Jane, we want to thank you. Jane was a person that knew the intelligence field very well, an expert when it comes to intelligence, and I certainly want to say thank you so much. And you're right, the Wilson Center has been one of those think tanks that's just been outstanding. And Jane, to you and Chris and all the folks that work here, Andrew, all of y'all, thank you for a great job. The council also, Edgar, you and all your folks have done a great job. I met Edgar a long time ago when I was in the state legislature. We used to work on many items together. We're working again, and I certainly want to say thank you for the great work that y'all did in putting this together. You know, we understand that the Rio Bravo or the Rio Grande does not divide us, but actually unites us as two countries. And I think my colleagues here, Beto from El Paso or Juan from California, also on the border, also, we're the type of legislators that. When we think about the border, we're not talking about security. We're actually looking for the opportunities, and Imelda, you know this very well from the Monterrey area, is that there are a lot of economic opportunities. Every day there's about $1.3 billion of trade between the U.S. and Mexico. My hometown of Laredo, and I think Beto and both Juan know this, in my hometown, and they each have their own strengths. In my hometown of Laredo, we handle about 45% of all the trade between the U.S. and Mexico. Trade is extremely important to us, and we understand why Mexico is a very important partner. And I think the Mexican embassy that's present here with us understands that Mexico is going to be very, very important, has been a very important friend. I know that the nominee for the ambassador for Mexico has withdrawn, so hopefully we can, Anthony is doing a great job, but if we're going to look for somebody, hopefully the president will move on that quickly so we can get a new ambassador up there. Let me just say this, the report is something that I think you should take a look at, read it very carefully, because it will provide a blueprint of what the relationship should be between the U.S. and Mexico. I will be working with my colleagues on a border bill. And it's not security. It actually focuses, it's two bills. One is on the U.S. and Mexico, dealing with everything else but security. So instead of security, it looks at education and other economic activities. Number one, I know that Ed Royce is supportive. We've been working with him, and Engel also, Elliot Engel. So we are looking at one piece dealing with the relationship between the U.S. and Mexico. The other part of it will go to another committee, and we'll deal with infrastructure. And basically, a lot of the ideas that y'all have used have been brought up here. Something similar to Beyond the Border that Canada and the U.S. has. And certainly we are going to be looking at the recommendations that you're coming up with. So we're really excited that there are folks like Beto and Juan, myself and other folks on the border that look at not the security part. Security is important, but the economic opportunities between the U.S. and Mexico, whether it's trade or energy or whatever the case might be, international education. And those are the things that we certainly want to focus. I want to thank all of you all. Certainly want to thank the Wilson Center and the council again, and my colleagues, and Imelda. I like her name. That's my wife's name. And can't go wrong with that name. And certainly I want to thank all of y'all for being here. So again, if you have any ideas on the legislation, please let us know. I know that Sal and Wendell are both here. We're looking at ways to add one through two legislative bills, and the other one through the appropriations. We found out through the appropriations, that's many a times that's the only train that moves at the end. And if that's the train that's going to be moving, we're going to try to put language there. So again, thank you so much. I have the San Antonio delegation. My district goes from San Antonio to the McAllen. So I got San Antonio, McAllen here, mayor, city council. So I'm going to be excusing myself. And this will give Beto and Juan to say all the good things when I walk out.
Thanks very much, Congressman Cuellar.
Thank you. I'll see you, brother.
And we'll just head down the line then. So Congressman O'Rourke, who represents the El Paso area, has been a relatively new member of Congress still, but has come on with tremendous enthusiasm for the border and for promoting both his part of the border and the border in general, the importance of it to our national economy. Thanks a lot for participating today.
Thank you, Jane and Wilson Center. Thanks for having us here today. Chris and Eric, congratulations. We really appreciate your work. Very, very important work. Edgar, thank you for making it possible for El Paso to participate as we did in September at the conference where some of the findings were made for this report. I come from El Paso, Texas, which is conjoined with Ciudad Juarez, and together they form the largest binational metroplex anywhere in the world. 3 million people, binational, bicultural, bilingual. El Paso happens to be the safest city on the border in the state of Texas and in the United States today, and it has been for the last 4 years, despite being connected to Ciudad Juarez, which until recently was one of the most violent communities anywhere in the world. But it's not an outlier. San Diego, Laredo, McAllen are all safer than the U.S. average in terms of crime statistics. And I like to tell people that is in large part because of, and not in spite of, the significant number of immigrants and immigrant families, documented and otherwise, who live in our communities, who are there to get ahead, to provide for their kids, and strengthen our communities and actually make them a lot safer. The Dallas branch of the Federal Reserve estimates that 1 out of every 4 jobs in El Paso, a city of 800,000, is connected to U.S. Mexico trade. So the border is a source of tremendous economic growth and jobs that we have in our community. Over 420,000 jobs in the state of Texas and 6 million across the United States. Every year in the El Paso sector, $90 billion in U.S. Mexico trade cross our ports of entry. 30 million legal, purposeful crossings in the El Paso ports of entry. Those are commuters, kids going to the University of Texas at El Paso, people who start their day in El Paso and work at the Maquilas in Ciudad Juarez. So by any objective measure, and certainly those things that I can't quantify, but just having grown up there that make El Paso so special, the border should be a source of tremendous pride. It is where literally Latin America and Anglo-North America meet and connect. And in El Paso and Ciudad Juarez, more than any other place, we're incredibly safe. We are a font of culture and migration and growth, and a source of literally millions of jobs. And yet, despite the facts, the prevailing narrative, and I served on the Homeland Security Committee for 2 years, is that the border is a source of anxiety and fear and shame. This is where ISIS is crossing over to murder Americans. This is where Al-Qaeda has sleeper cells who are coming to attack us in our homes. This is where Hezbollah is about to cross to assassinate Americans and foreign nationals in our country. Not a new storyline. I found a copy of the El Paso Herald Post from 1983 that talks about Libyan terrorist sleeper cells in Ciudad Juarez. Needless to say, they never materialized, but you can understand that the border has been a source of anxiety. It's where our country, in many ways, meets the rest of the world. And yet, again, by the facts, 2,000 miles of a peaceful border should be the envy, and I think is, in many ways, the envy of the rest of the world. A dynamic source of jobs and economic growth. And so, we're very hopeful that this report will play an important role in continuing to change the dialogue and the narrative and introducing facts, as inconvenient as they may be, to recast the border in a light that shows what it really is and what it really can be for the United States. If instead of spending outrageous sums, as we do every year, to quote-unquote secure the border, $18 billion a year, despite the fact that last year, after the surge of Central American migrants, we had under 500,000 apprehensions. Compare that to the eve of 9/11 when we had 1.6 million apprehensions. Despite the fact that El Paso is the safest community, et cetera, all you hear from Washington, D.C., by and large, are more calls to spend more money to further militarize through drones, walls, and other means the U.S. Mexico border, when we could be spending that money on strengthening our ports of entry, having additional CBP officers to pass more legitimate trade and crossings to further strengthen and embolden and power the U.S. economy and this country. So we are grateful for the work of the Wilson Center, for Eric and Chris and everyone who's a part of this effort to make sure that we capitalize on these incredible opportunities that we have on the border, make the most of them. And I, for one, and I know my co-panelists will be part of that effort going forward. So thank you for your work and thanks for having us here today.
Thanks very much, Congressman O'Rourke. And yeah, I should mention that all of these members up on the stage right here were participants in or helped host actually some of the forums that we had throughout last year to capture the ideas that are in this report. So the ideas in this report, the recommendations are truly the recommendations of your constituents, and thanks for helping create those opportunities so that we could interact with them. We're going to now pass the word to Congressman Vargas, who represents the entire California-Mexico border, as a matter of fact, all the way from San Diego across through Imperial Valley. So thanks so much for joining us.
Well, thank you very much, Chris. I appreciate it. And again, Congresswoman Jane Harman, thank you again for allowing us to be here. They need a lot of Texans to represent the border over there in California. We just need one to represent the entire border. And one of the things that is interesting is I'm from San Diego, and again, one of the safest cities in the world. But not only that, one of the nice things about being from San Diego is when you talk about the border, people start talking about violence and how it's unlivable. I can always say, oh, really? I live in the finest city in America, city of San Diego, and we're right on the border, and very, very proud of that. And again, I think we're safe, not in spite of the border, but because of the border. Again, all the immigrants that come and live there and work hard and raise families and really do a heck of a job of making that a wonderful community. One of the things I do want to say, though, about San Diego is we have the busiest land port of entry there in San Isidro and San Diego and Tijuana. And it's very interesting because one of the things we have been able to do is to work with work together as a delegation from San Diego and push a lot of new construction forward. In fact, the San Isidro Land Port of Entry, when it's all said and done, we're going to spend about, I'm almost embarrassed to say about $800 million to redo that. And I'm not embarrassed, because it's needed. It's going to be a magnet. But right now it's so crowded. People wait hours and hours in line because people do want to come from Tijuana to San Diego and from San Diego to Tijuana. It's one of the things that people don't realize, that Tijuana is very affordable and a wonderful place to live. If you work downtown, it's much easier to go from downtown San Diego to Tijuana than from San Diego to Oceanside or Escondido, another part in San Diego. It's twice as far. So anyway, it's one of the things that I am very proud of. We have worked with the entire delegation. In fact, the person I think has been most instrumental in San Diego has been Darrell Issa. Darrell Issa has been fantastic to work with, and he understands how important that land port of entry, and he has pushed very hard to make sure that the money has been there these last 3 sessions to keep that thing going. And I'm very proud of that. Even though we will disagree tremendously on the issue of security, we can come together, and we did come together with respect to the economy and how important it is. The San Diego Chamber of Commerce, Greater Chamber of Commerce, the same thing. I can't help but say that I see a good colleague of mine here, Mayor Steve Padilla, who was the mayor of Chula Vista, and we competed all the time when I was on the city of San Diego, trying to get business because we knew how important business was from Tijuana. And it's good to see you here, Mayor. Pleasure. I'd also say this, that in San Diego we're doing a couple of very creative things, and not only are we improving the land port of entry, but we also have, of course, the Mexican airport in Tijuana that is used primarily by people coming from the United States going somewhere else. So now we are building, in fact, a facility so you can park on the United States side, cross the border, and connect to the terminal in Tijuana and fly out to Mexico and other parts of the world. And we're very, very excited about that. Again, it's where the entire community has come together. This has been something that we've been working on for a very long time. We do still have challenges, however. Calexico is in the Imperial County. Again, a tremendously robust area, a lot of agriculture. However, the land port of entry there has not been improved in 1,000 years, unfortunately. And you do have waits there that are 2-3 hours in the summer when the temperature is 120 degrees. And you talk about an environmental disaster there. You've got these trucks, cars, and everything else running when it's 120 degrees. You have all these children in the car, and it's a real problem. So we were able to secure about $100 million in the last budget. Unfortunately, we don't have it in this budget, but we still have to work on that, and we are. But again, very proud of the work we've done. And by the way, even though it's not in San Diego County, we have the entire San Diego delegation in favor of and pushing for it, which again has been very helpful. I won't go on with these facts and figures because I know that we're a little bit behind, but I would like to say that one of the things that is important is the focus on the economics, because the economics are important to San Diego. We know that Tijuana has been a blessing for us. We know that Mexico has been a blessing for us. But unfortunately, our infrastructure hasn't kept up with that. The good thing about it, though, is locally, the Democrats, Republicans, Independents, all of us agree on that. And in fact, even though we will have our fights on comprehensive immigration reform here, even someone like Duncan Hunter, whose father built the fence there, agrees that the economics are important. And he was also a signatory to the letters that we've been sending out saying, you know, we have to improve the land port of entries. We have to improve these crossings. We have to make sure that the commerce continues to move and increases. We think it's good for San Diego. We think it's good for the entire region. And thankfully, we're all in agreement with that. Conservative Republicans and very liberal Democrats. So, although I guess I should have done it the other way around. Again, thank you very much for your work. I think you've put that focus on it and you've given it legitimacy, and I appreciate that very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Congressman Vargas. Really appreciate you being here with us today as well. Last but certainly not least is Diputada Imelda Guadalupe Alejandra de la Garza, Chair of the Border Legislative Conference, who really actually helped host the entire set of forums with us there as an organization, and the Diputada personally helped put on some of the forums that created the ideas that are in this report. And so thanks so much for being here. I'll let you explain your role in the process in the Border Legislative Conference. Thanks.
Buenas tardes, le voy a pedir el apoyo a Chris con la traducción.
I think, you know, I have to apologize. I didn't realize that she prepared her remarks in Spanish, but I think actually the grand majority of our audience speaks Spanish, so I think it will be fine if you just deliver your remarks in Spanish.
Bueno, pues gracias, principalmente, gracias Chris. Por parte de la Conferencia de Legisladores Fronterizos, queremos agradecer al Wilson Center, a Chris, por la investigación documental tan minuciosa y el trabajo invertido con el propósito de consolidar, y el día de hoy pues tener la posibilidad de presentar el informe, el reporte que tienes de la economía de la frontera de México, Estados Unidos en transición. Nuestro sincero agradecimiento a nuestro socio de investigación de Woodrow Wilson, como es North American Research Partnership, Eric Lee. Muchísimas gracias, Eric, por el apoyo, por haber desarrollado este reporte integral enfocado a fortalecer la competitividad económica de la franja fronteriza. Hace más de un año, nuestros socios de investigación, así como integrantes del caucus del Congreso de la Unión de Estados Unidos, convocaron a una serie de foros regionales con residentes, líderes del sector empresarial y académico para intercambiar ideas respecto a los retos y oportunidades para eficientizar la competitividad de la frontera. Dicho informe, así como el mapa situacional legislativo, arrojaron las recopilaciones y conclusiones de estos foros en varias vertientes como infraestructura, transporte y cruces fronterizos. Mejorar la competitividad de la frontera es responsabilidad de ambos países. Incluso hay un compromiso contraído en febrero de 2014 en el Estado de México por nuestros presidentes. Estamos conscientes que hay un rezago incuestionable en el caso de México, por lo que este informe nos brinda las herramientas, estadísticas y datos que ayudarán a desarrollar una visión fundamentada y sostenible tanto en México como también áreas de oportunidad para Estados Unidos, así como lo mencionaba el representante Vargas. Para concretar acciones, el informe presenta un análisis para atraer mayor inversión, incrementar exportaciones, colaboración y el desarrollo de un proyecto binacional o regional común. En el foro realizado en El Paso, el representante Beto O'Rourke mencionó que cuando nosotros fallamos en definir la frontera, dejamos que otros definan la frontera por nosotros. Y este reporte es precisamente, nos da la oportunidad de no solo discutir, sino de explotar el enorme potencial de la franja fronteriza al crecimiento económico. Lo que se ha discutido en las ciudades fronterizas y nosotros, la franja fronteriza es un país alterno y que muy difícilmente las capitales de nuestros estados entienden. Solamente la gente que estamos en la frontera entendemos, así como lo decía el representante O'Rourke, es una biculturalidad, es bilingüe, se vive muy ajeno a cómo se vive en el resto del país, y por eso es muy complicado que las capitales de nuestros estados lo comprendan. Cabe destacar que la frontera es el motor de la relación económica, ya que el 75% del comercio cruza por puertos de entrada terrestre. El informe señala avances importantes como el que mencionaba el representante Vargas respecto al Cross Border Express, el que está mencionando de Tijuana, y así como la planeación regional, la relación del Paso Ciudad Juárez, Tijuana Tecate con San Diego. Y esto ha ocurrido gracias, así como lo mencionaba al alcalde y a la gestión de cada uno de las regiones fronterizas, aún y a pesar de la burocracia, de la falta de partidas presupuestales de los gobiernos federales de ambos países. El presidente de Eagle Ford Consortium, Leodoro Martínez, que es el pozo que está extrayendo gas shale en Texas, especificó en el foro regional desarrollado en Laredo, Texas, que para la explotación del sector energético proyectado se requiere mano de obra calificada, técnicos especializados. Sin embargo, pues yo les quisiera compartir, y para eso voy a pedirles el apoyo a los representantes para que hagan presión ellos cuando tengan estas reuniones con la contraparte del Estado mexicano. Leodoro Martínez de Eagle Ford, de Cotula, Texas, él nos mencionaba en Laredo, en el foro de Laredo, en noviembre del 2012, que efectivamente íbamos a requerir mano de obra calificada, técnicos especializados, ¿sí? Y el secretario de Educación, al menos en el estado de Nuevo León, lo busqué en noviembre después de este foro y le dije, necesitamos cambiarlos, eso fue en el 2012, pero el foro fue el año pasado. Lo que le externaba al secretario estatal de que tenían que cambiar los planes de estudio para empezar a preparar y tener mano de obra calificada y estar preparados para lo que viene con el tema energético. Si bien ya se aprobaron las reformas, pero nosotros tenemos un rezago y el piso del que compite México, pues obviamente es muy diferente al que tienen en la frontera con Estados Unidos o en los estados donde tienen gas o petróleo. Y la respuesta al menos el del secretario estatal en el estado de Nuevo León, dijo que faltaba muchísimo tiempo para que el tema energético se aterrizara, así que no había prisa. En julio de 2014 acudí a la Universidad de Nuevo León, además para que entendamos el piso y la diferencia y en el tema, sobre todo en el tema energético, que eso ya es imperativo y es urgente. Solicitamos una preparatoria en la zona de Cuenca de Burgos, que es en el noreste de México, que es donde se va a estar explotando el tema del gas. Estuve con la Universidad de Nuevo León y les decía que necesitábamos precisamente en esos municipios poner ya fuera carreras profesionales o carreras técnicas con enfoque en petroquímica, y me dijeron, diputada, la zona rural de Nuevo León no es prioridad, el 88% de la población de Nuevo León se concentra en la zona metropolitana. Entonces, la zona rural no es prioridad, así que hay una deuda muy grande en el estado de Nuevo León, que por cierto, el gobierno estatal aumentó en 580% en estos 5 años que lleva. Entonces, hay una deuda muy alta, no hay presupuesto y la zona rural no es prioridad. Entonces, precisamente coincido con lo que decía el representante Cuellar en el tema que la educación es cómo fortalecer, ¿sí?, el tema de la competitividad económica en la franja fronteriza, y un tema muy importante, así como dijo Mandela, un país educado es más difícil de controlar. Creo que lo que necesita México es precisamente mejorar en el tema educativo, obviamente, como es evidente, y con ello dejaríamos de exportar migrantes ilegales que solo anhelan un trabajo digno. México solamente requeremos educación. Adicionalmente, apreciaríamos su apoyo cuando tengan alguna reunión con sus contrapartes para el tema de acelerar la legislación en el tema de regulación estatal, que en el tema energético, que también, hablando con el secretario a nivel federal de Energía, yo le decía que ya los congresos locales deberíamos de estar aterrizando el tema de regulación para ver cómo se va a hacer la explotación, pero al parecer todavía no tenemos brújula en ese sentido. Hay muchísimo trabajo por realizar para sacar ventaja de nuestro potencial y pues es un privilegio estar con ustedes. Muchas gracias, Cris, representantes. Gracias a cada uno de los que hoy nos honra con su presencia, y quiero particularmente mencionar el trabajo en conjunto de hoy. Fue posible gracias al apoyo de USAID, por lo que queremos hacer un reconocimiento y valorar el enorme esfuerzo por invertir en el capítulo de la Conferencia de Legisladores Fronterizos. Y ya que esta aportación es invaluable, el respaldo y la cobertura como facilitador y puente para el desarrollo de proyectos en la implementación de mecanismos que eficienticen y fortalezcan la productividad de la relación económica de nuestra frontera. Es invaluable. Muchísimas gracias.
Gracias, diputada. Once again, thank you to all of our members of Congress that joined us here today. We're going to take just switch up the stage here and let you all get back to your committee work and session today. But thanks again for coming. We really appreciate the support.
Thank you for inviting us.
And I'm going to welcome up to the stage as we do this Beth Hogan, who is Acting Assistant Administrator for the Latin American Caribbean Bureau of USAID.
I'm just going to go to regular Longhorns. No, thank you for doing this.
Thanks a lot for
Yeah,
coming
look
by.
forward to
Really
reading it.
appreciate
Yeah,
it.
of course. Wouldn't miss it. We'll see you in El Paso in August. I'll see you before then.
And before then.
Thank you for the invitation. Of course. What a pleasure.
Thanks. I didn't get to say hi beforehand, but thanks so much for coming today. Really appreciate it. Would you like to make remarks from the podium or sitting down, whatever you prefer?
Maybe I'll just, since I'm all alone,
Sure.
it won't look so lonely if I'm standing.
Okay, that sounds great. Oh.
Almost fell over.
So we're going to move right along with our program. As I mentioned, we're delighted to have with us Acting Assistant Administrator for the Latin American Caribbean Bureau of USAID, Beth Hogan. USAID helped support this whole process and actually made it possible. Some of the work with the Border Legislative Conference, which is the grouping of state legislatures all along the U.S. Mexico border, but also this specific series of conferences that we held in the border region that generated the ideas for this report. So thank you so much for your support, and thanks so much for being here today.
Sure, my pleasure. I'm very happy to be here at the launch of this report. And again, congratulations to the Wilson Center, to the Council of State Governments West, and to the Border Legislative Conference for spearheading this effort and documenting this great set of recommendations that we have here today. This is really a very, very exciting and promising time for Mexico's economy. Mexico's bold economic reform agenda includes constitutional and major legislative changes with the goals of strengthening competition, revitalizing the energy sector, improving the education system, and broadening access to finance. The U.S. government is deeply committed to continuing to partner with Mexico to help Mexico achieve its objectives and thereby improving our own security and economic competitiveness. Nowhere is this commitment more evident than in the launch of the high-level economic dialogue that President Obama and President Peña Nieto launched in May of 2013. This is a high-level dialogue that contains cabinet-level and independent office-level participation from both sides of the Mexican state and the United States to look at areas of opportunity and challenges where we need to work together in a more integrated fashion. I have to say that I was in one of the very early meetings as the high-level economic dialogue was being created, and the NSC hosted a meeting for all of the various and sundry cabinet ministry or state governments that we have across our government. And there had to be 50 organizations or 50 separate agencies and institutions represented in that room, everything from trade, to energy, to commerce, to telecommunications, to justice, to the Department of Homeland Security. And it was really kind of overwhelming because we're in a room of 30 chairs and we had at least 50 people in the room. And it just goes to say how deeply connected we are as two countries and the broad array of issues and challenges that we face together. So we started there, and as we've seen going forward, we have had a very successful set of meetings launched and by our vice president as well. And what is USAID's place in this picture, I guess you would say? Well, first of all, we are in a rather unique role with our counterparts in Mexico, in that it really is an intellectual partnership of equals. We provide technical assistance in 4 areas: improving citizen security, justice reform, environmental sustainability, and economic competitiveness. But when we say technical assistance, it's really a two-way street. We're learning as much from Mexico as Mexico is learning from us, and so we do approach this in true partnership form. Mexico itself is an emerging donor, and we are partnering with AMEXED, Mexico's development agency, to do trilateral cooperation in other countries, and we're really very excited about that. We see Mexico as an emerging donor that has a lot to share with the rest of Latin America and even beyond. So that's also shows just how unique the relationship is between our development agencies. But on the economic competitive front, most specifically, we're working, USAID is working with the Ministry of Economy, the National Entrepreneurship Institute, the Federal Economic Competition Commission, and other agencies to support basically 3 streams of work. First, we're focusing on small and medium-sized business. Here we want to help small and medium, to really unlock the potential of SMEs by making business transactions more efficient and reliable, improving their access to private capital, and increasing their competitiveness, because we know that small and medium-sized enterprises are where they're really the job creators, and so that's why we're focusing there. But we're also supporting workforce development initiatives by promoting systemic reforms that improve the match between what higher education and vocational schools are offering and what new economy jobs and businesses are demanding. And so there we have a lot of interest, both, again, what we can help Mexico in doing in terms of what we've learned, and also what we can learn from Mexico. And then thirdly, we're trying to stimulate access to credit through private sector partners. We know that banks in general tend to be very conservative. They're very conservative in Mexico, maybe even particularly conservative there. And so what we're doing are things like loan portfolio guarantees to Mexican private lenders to help unlock. We've guaranteed up to $60 million through a credit tool for SMEs, and we're investing in seed capital or early financing for new and emerging companies to help entrepreneurs get that first bit of money that can help them grow a business. And we're also particularly involved in growing green businesses that have the added benefit of not only spurring economic growth and creating jobs, but also helping the environment at the same time. So, coming back to this report, we're happy to be a partner in financing the part of this report. We recognize that it has some really great recommendations, which I won't go through because I believe the next panel will do that. But I really wanted to commend the authors and the participants in this process for coming up with recommendations that are practical, that are achievable, most importantly, and very tangible. We certainly hope that this report has a real life, that it's not something that sits on a shelf, but rather that it's a guide. And it really is a guide to the kind of legislative reforms that have worked to help spur economic competitiveness on both sides of the border, and actually some legislative examples of reforms that could be taken to help push that ball down the court, if you will. So again, thanks to the authors for such a practical and useful guide, and I look forward to the next presentation when we'll learn more about the specific recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you. So we're going to move on to the presentation of the report itself, and glad to welcome to the stage Edgar Ruiz, the Executive Director of the Council of State Governments West, who helps administer the Border Legislative Conference and this series of events and process that guided us to this report. And also my co-author, Eric Lee, who's Executive Director of the North American Research Partnership, a relatively newly formed think tank based in Arizona and San Diego that's doing work on North America, but with a strong focus on the U.S. Mexico border. Glad to have you both here today. I'm just going to pass it straight to you, Edgar, to tell us a little bit of the background of the process of how we got to this point. It's sort of been, you've heard it in bits and pieces throughout the session already, but it's worth understanding because it's a really unique process that created this report.
Thank you, Chris. And on behalf of the Council of State Governments West, I want to thank the Wilson Center for hosting us here. I want to thank our research partners for all of their efforts. I also want to thank our staff of the Border Legislative Conference, Marta Castañeda, who's the Director of International Programs at CSG West, Alma Lopez, Luis, and Christina Bailey, who are also here with us. Over a year and a half ago, we began a process where we try to tie in basically the different elements. One, we wanted to solicit community input from the border region. We also wanted to integrate the great work that our research partners have done by bringing those issues to light, and also the work of our own Border Legislative Conference, which obviously is a mechanism of cooperation among legislators of the 10 U.S. Mexico border states. And then partnering also with key members of Congress, particularly those along the border. And obviously, 3 of them were here earlier this morning. Also, we worked with Congressman Raul Grijalva from Arizona. We convened a series of 4 forums, and they were regional in nature. So the first one convened in San Diego, focusing on the Baja California region. The next one focused on the Sonora, Arizona region. Our third one was on the Laredo area, focusing on East Texas, Nuevo León and Tamaulipas. And then the fourth was the El Paso region, which is also New Mexico and Ciudad Juarez. And each of the forums included plenary sessions focused on topics that are important to that particular region. But we also included simultaneous breakout sessions that were aimed to solicit input and feedback from participants. These were folks that were members of local government, business leaders, and other stakeholders. So this report that you have before you is really a compilation of the feedback that we received in each of these forums. We've also developed something called a roadmap for legislative action, which really is a supplemental to this, but also provides some information or examples of legislation that have already been introduced in border states, which are aimed to provide action to some of the recommendations on the other report. As part of our outreach efforts in the coming months, we'll be going to all of our 10 U.S. Mexico border states to present the report and the findings, with the aim that our legislators will be able to promote actions on these areas. The roadmap, as I mentioned, has proposed legislation, and it's important that the states play an important role. The border region is a very multi-jurisdictional area. You have local, state, and federal governments that oversee many facets of life along the border. And certainly while states can continue to lobby their federal agencies to make change, but they too have the jurisdiction and the authority to take on some of these issues. When you look at the pillars of the high-level economic development dialogue, there's 3 of them. Obviously, the promotion of competitiveness and connectivity, and that's transportation and telecommunications, the fostering of economic growth, productivity, and entrepreneurship and innovation, and the partnering of regional and global leadership. These are areas that states certainly have the ability to make change. When you look at workforce development, obviously that entails education, and it's going to be up to the states who obviously have the laws and school districts to make that happen, to create a very productive workforce. When you look at economic development, cities, counties, municipios are the ones that develop the economic development plans. And so they have to be in concert with the broader goals that the 2 federal governments are pursuing. And obviously, in all of this, collaboration is very important. In order to advance progress along the border, it requires all of the stakeholders to come together, have a common vision, and promote change. And obviously, that is not easy. Many of us have been working on the border for quite some time, and obviously we've seen the progression. And there's been some great glimmers of hope. Earlier today, we heard about the airport terminal in San Diego, Tijuana. That is something new that hopefully will create similar projects along the border. When you look at regional planning, we come a long way. I remember when NAFTA was established. I know in Otay Mesa, basically the port of entry was established by the federal agencies, but there was very little coordination to create the roads leading up to that port of entry. Obviously now regional planning has changed. Local agencies are involved and states, and so a lot has been done, but certainly a lot more needs to happen in order to take advantage of the enormous potential that the U.S. Mexico border region has. So with that, as a broad overview, I think now I'd like to have both Eric and Chris perhaps give us an overview of some of the specifics, or some, obviously it's a long document, but maybe they can give us some of the nuggets of some of the key recommendations that are in the report. Eric?
Yeah, it's just right here. I'll hit the slides for you.
Great. Fantastic. Thanks so much, Edgar, and Chris and Duncan for hosting this event. I was here in May for your outstanding border conference that had a tremendous amount of energy to it. So it's excellent to be back and watch your programming just roll on, and the discussion of the U.S. Mexico border here in Washington expand. Mostly due to your efforts. Thanks again to USAID, CSG West, and the BLC for their support for this initiative, the members of Congress for hosting the forums, and my colleagues, Rick Van Scoik and Ruth Soberdanis is with us today, who did outstanding work on the report in the areas of energy sustainability and human capital. I really recommend those chapters. As Chris mentioned, we are based in the border region. I do a lot of my work in San Diego, but even more in the Arizona-Sonora region, which is one of the most interesting subregions of the U.S. Mexico border. There's a very old economic relationship there, very well established, that is based on, a lot of it's based on fresh produce, coming from Sinaloa through the Nogales-Mariposa port of entry, up into Arizona and to the rest of the United States and even Canada. It's a very interesting environment. There is a new explosion of interest in Arizona in working with Mexico. The state and the city of Phoenix have opened trade offices in Mexico City, which really is quite a swing from 2010 with Arizona's diplomatic troubles based on SB 1070, and that seems to be a chapter that the state wants to move on from. So it is an interesting place to work, to say the least. But we are based in the border region. This is a region of great potential that suffers from isolation in many forms. It's almost triply isolated. It's isolated from the two national capitals. That in and of itself makes it difficult to manage the region, to even conceive of this 2,000-mile long region which unites the two countries' economies. It's even isolated from the state capitals. Mexicali is the only state capital that's located on the border. And as circling back to something that Diputada Imelda mentioned just a few minutes ago, the communities themselves are isolated from each other. So this is, we have isolation in various forms. There is this disconnect between the highly urbanized areas and the rural areas along the border that you so skillfully drew out for us, but you see that everywhere. San Diego, the Imperial Valley, the Phoenix area, southern Arizona, El Paso, the rural areas in South Texas. So this makes it quite challenging. So the ongoing needs in the region for economic development and enhanced trade, plus a shift in the bilateral agenda, were really the impetus behind this report. So we have a lot of activity going on at the high-level economic dialogue. We're very interested in this and really have wanted to draw out what this means for this critical region. We have a lot of content for you, as we've kind of implied here. We have the report, which is, not sure how many pages it is, but it's fairly detailed. It has chapters on institutions, economic development, ports of entry, huge discussion in the border region on ports of entry, human capital development, and energy. In addition to that, we have executive summaries of what happened, the discussions at the regional forums. We have 4 of those in English and Spanish. That is a really good way to drill down to see what's happening on the ground in the border regions. In addition to that, we have a list of 27 ways to increase competitiveness in the border region. We'll have this video, and then we'll take this on the road to the state capitals in the border regions. So we have generated a number of different ways for you to see this, and I hope that's helpful. In our presentation today, Chris and I are going to hit the major recommendations of the report. We won't drill down too far. I think the recommendations really do come from the border stakeholders themselves. Several hundred border stakeholders participated in our forums, generated a tremendous amount of content and ideas. It's really a region of ideas and big thinkers. It's a fascinating place. I am going to focus on just 2 aspects: institutions and economic development efforts. What I tried to do in this chapter is provide a scorecard so you can tell who the players are. There are a number of institutions that have a say in the economic development and economic growth of the region. Starting with just at the federal level, you have the State Department, you have Mexico's Foreign Ministry, you have the big transportation agencies, absolutely critical in building transportation infrastructure to get us to the border and from the border. You have the Department of Commerce and their counterparts at Economia in Mexico City. You have the embassies, you have the consulates. You have a number of agencies that you have USAID, obviously. You have a number of agencies that we don't have time to touch on here. And then below that, you have the big bilateral institutions, NAD Bank, North American Development Bank, which was recently recapitalized by the 2 federal governments. Absolutely a critical actor in the border region, has financed a lot of really, really important environmental infrastructure projects, ports of entry infrastructure. And below that, we have state organizations. We have organizations such as the Border Legislative Conference, which meets twice a year, has a professional staff, issues joint communiques, has committees within the border legislative structure. This is really the way to run an organization like that in the binational context. Binational work is slow. It's doubly complex. You are joining 2 different political cultures, and it takes staff. It takes a lot of work. On the other hand, you have this absolutely critical organization, the Border Governors Conference, and I want to spend a little bit of time on this. This is by a long ways, the highest profile of kind of the state level organizations, or it has had the highest profile for many years. If you remember the Border Governors Conference that was at Universal Studios, it was organized by former Governor Schwarzenegger, and they had the Ray-Bans on, and I think there was a Harley-Davidson involved. I mean, those were fantastic times for the Border Governors Conference. That seems really silly, but in retrospect, from my perspective, you had, I believe, all 10 governors there, and that almost never happens. You have this historical imbalance in interest. Lots of times you will have no-shows on the U.S. side, and you'll have all 6 Mexican governors show up. So it's that's one of the issues. The other issue is that the group hasn't met for the last 2 years. The last meeting was in New Mexico, hosted by Governor Susana Martinez, I think 3 years ago. The Border Governors Conference in Texas was canceled. The one in Chihuahua was canceled. Arizona in 2010 had a gap there with SB 1070 and the refusal of the Mexican governors to show up that year. Bill Richardson picked up kind of an interim meeting that year. But this organization has tremendous potential to really affect change. 10 state governors in the U.S. and Mexico, when they get together and have a concerted ask to the federal governments, that can pack a really powerful punch. They don't have any staff. There's no ongoing funding. It's really a very, very weak organization. And a lot of this is about funding. I mean, they really, really need. We have 2 well-funded federal governments. We have 10 very large state governments. We have a private sector in the border region with a vested interest in seeing this be more functional and having a concerted voice from the border region. Can we scrape together $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 just to get this organization staffed? My kingdom for $500,000 to organize this institution's very important, very weak, very dysfunctional, but going forward will be important in the border region's development. Just touched a little bit on the border. So these regions need support, and support comes down to money, not just from the federal governments, also from the state governments, private sector. We can do this. The second chapter that I touched on had to do with economic development efforts. As I said, this is a very active region in terms of its stakeholder organizations that promote and advocate for greater trade between the 2 countries. The San Diego Chamber of Commerce organizes a huge trip out here on an annual basis, and another trip to Mexico City. So you see that along the border. And the state of Arizona now has had several trade missions to Mexico. But the weakness there is that these are very isolated efforts. They end up saying, these trade missions end up asking for very similar things, better ports of entry, better funded ports of entry, reduced wait times at the border ports of entry. And so this kind of, the action items get lost in the noise. What we are seeing in the border region is something that's very interesting, and it really started out in Southern California with the creation of the Cali-Baja mega region. Very interesting organization. It's kind of I would describe it as a consortium of economic development organizations in the region. One of the things they did right at the outset was promise not to steal companies from each other. So there was kind of a peace process just there in Southern California and Northern Baja California. That's absolutely critical. I mean, there has been historically a tremendous rivalry between San Diego and the Imperial Valley. This kind of helped to tamp down those rivalries. We see interest in Arizona in forming something similar. We see in the El Paso region, I believe Congressman O'Rourke touched a little bit on the Borderplex Alliance, which brings together El Paso, Ciudad Juarez, and Las Cruces. Again, that doesn't seem like a big deal. It seems like they're next door. They should get along fantastically, but that has not been the case historically. In South Texas, we have the new BINED initiative in Brownsville that works with stakeholders in Matamoros. So we're in a process of shrinking the border at least a little bit and promoting some unity and concerted efforts between the communities on the border that historically have not really understood each other or really work together very much. So our other major recommendation here is to support these organizations. Cali-Baja was created with an Economic Development Administration grant. I would say that the footprint of the EDA in the border region is very, very interesting. Cali-Baja received a grant from EDA. There was a study of the fresh produce industry in southern Arizona that was also supported by EDA. BINED has some support from EDA. And you almost never hear about this, but that kind of several six figures level of support can go a long ways in the border region. We need to continue that. We need to support these larger organizations that can have maybe a more important impact on economic development and can work to form maybe a more coherent message to the national capitals from the border region. And with that, we can transition into Chris's discussion. Touched a little bit on ports of entry, also human capital and energy.
Thanks very much, Eric. I appreciate it. I'm just going to jump right into recommendations because I think that's what's the most interesting thing in the report. And so the chapter that I wrote, I'm going to cover, and then a couple of the others also. But the ports of entry, this is about actually how you get people and goods back and forth across the border in a way that works. For too long, it didn't start after 9/11, but things were made more challenging after 9/11. There was a need to increase border security, but that came at the cost of economics and efficiency at the border for a long time. Where there's a transition now, moving to a model in which you can actually increase security and efficiency at the same time. And there's some ways to do that. And one of the ways to do that actually has nothing to do with how you're moving things back and forth across the border, but it's who's putting the ports of entry together, how they're getting funded, and who's designing them, who's controlling how they're organized. And what's really important here is that it's all levels of government that get involved in this process. There are some mechanisms in place to do that, but I think there's been a sort of a conversation in the border region recently about the need to have more public-private partnerships to fund and create ports of entry. The example of the airport terminal in Tijuana is one that's actually, it's a privately generated project. So these things are happening. But I think that's actually one of the messages that needs to get out there is there's a conversation as if this was a brand new idea, as if public-private partnerships were something that are just about to happen, and so we need brand new legislation to make them possible. And so I put together this table. I actually found it it was already created, but just the ownership of the Texas ports of entry. And you'll see on it, I don't know if you can read it very well, but you'll see that there are several of them that are privately owned. They're actually companies that are run as companies, owned by individuals or corporations. There are several that are federally owned by the U.S. International Water and Boundary Commission, technically, although they may be administered by, obviously, Customs and Border Protection on a day-to-day basis, and the GSA, the Government Services Administration. A couple of them are owned by, at least one, I should say, is owned by the state of Texas. And then several are owned, actually the majority in Texas are owned by the cities, and in large part are run by the cities. And so we have in place this huge array of models already of public-private partnership, of public-public partnership, connections between cities and state and federal government. And that's what we need, So we do have a couple of new legislative mechanisms that have been put in place at the federal level over the past 2 years through what's known as Section 560 and Section 559. These are pieces of funding bills that came out of the federal Congress here in the U.S. over the last couple of years that generate new legislative mechanisms, new legal frameworks for either donations to the federal government to help staff the ports of entry, or now something that's really just being fully articulated with new guidelines coming out for how infrastructure donations can be made from cities or from private entities to the federal government so that they can run things. But I think it's just that what's important is to say everyone has a role to play. There are these new mechanisms. So far, they've only been used by cities or coalitions of organizations that are, cities or private organizations. There's no reason state-level government can't get involved in Section 559 and 560, couldn't decide to help fund ports of entry or fund extra staffing to make sure the ports of entry are open with as many lanes as are needed to get people back and forth across the border in an efficient way. But there's some new frameworks, and there are some old frameworks. And all of those need to be taken advantage of, probably much more than they actually are currently. The next one is something that I've talked about before. I really believe that trusted traveler programs are the epitome of what we're trying to do with the border today. They are the epitome of a strategy, of a policy that allows you to improve security and efficiency at the exact same time. So how do they do that? Well, you all, I think, are probably familiar with global entry at the airports or even pre-check at the airports these days. These are programs in which if you're a trusted individual, if you've submitted information to the government, you then, in exchange for that, as long as you're found to be trustable, you get a fast pass through the security line, through the customs line, et cetera. Well, these programs are in place at the border as well, right? And they have been for quite a while in the post-9/11 years, but they haven't always been fully taken advantage of. What I have here on the graph is just showing, it's a little small to see, but the top line, the one that's growing quite a bit, is enrollment in what's known as Sentry. That's the program that individuals enroll in to cross the border. Still, we're probably talking about 35% of all border crossings happening through the Sentry lines. Now, if you realize that the people who cross the border cross it multiple times a day, multiple times a week, there's probably actually a much greater percentage of great candidates for a program like this that still aren't enrolled. So there's a need even there, it's been a success because it's been growing in recent years, to boost that even further, to find ways to grow that enrollment. Also, if you look on the commercial side, though, enrollment's been much flatter, and in some cases actually even declining sometimes. So there's a huge need to look at what can you do to improve these programs to make sure that it's worth it for individuals to enroll in them. And I think one of the big things there is making sure that they have dedicated lanes, dedicated traffic lanes that they can get into to have a fast way across the border. Make sure that those go back as far as there's traffic on the Mexican side of the border. So this is something that has to be done obviously in a binational way in collaboration between the two governments, because the lines have to match up, they have to work properly together, but you need to make sure that whoever makes the payment, because it costs some money to get in these programs on both the U.S. and Mexican side, and that's not always understood, that they get the bang for their buck. And so they need to be able to get past the whole line, not just the last 10 minutes of the line. So that's one thing that can still be improved there. Another on ports of entry, and I think this is one of the kind of most exciting recommendations because it was something that really was generated through this process. I hadn't really heard a whole lot of talk about it before, is the really recreation of public transportation options to get straight across the border. In El Paso and Ciudad Juarez, there used to be a trolley that ran straight across the border and connected the two downtowns, which are really one downtown, but now increasingly actually they are two downtowns because it's harder and harder to get across the border. In Laredo and Nuevo Laredo, there used to be a trolley also. That closed a long time ago. But they don't have to be trolleys. They could be dedicated bus lines. But I think it's worth thinking about, and it will be hard to do. Admittedly, it will be hard to do in this new context of what the security requirements are. It will be hard to figure out a way to make it so that a trolley or a bus going across the border doesn't have to stop for an hour to get everybody out and offloaded and loaded back up on the other side. But let's dream big. Let's dream big and say, what do we want the border to look like in the future? Because if we don't do that, we're going to keep building the ports of entry of today, not the ports of entry of tomorrow. So let's think about what they should look like in the future so that we can start having conversations, again, between local government, state government, CBP. How can we do this? What's feasible? Do we have to have a CBP official on the bus, or not? I don't know what the answer to that question is, but let's dream big. This is just one example of that. Let's dream up the ports of entry of tomorrow instead of continuing to build the ports of entry of today. One thing we think is really important is the border region traditionally has been thought of as a region of cheap labor. The maquiladora industry grew up along the border, and that was a way to take advantage of lower wages in Mexico to lower manufacturing costs in the U.S. and Mexico together. And it worked, and it worked for a number of years. But, there are other places with cheaper wages in the world. And some of the maquila industries that used to be on the border have gone to those places, whether China or Vietnam or who knows where. The wages in China have actually gone up, and that's helped the industry in Mexico. But more important than that, industry in Mexico has moved up the value-added chain. And it's becoming more and more advanced. And so if we're moving from a border region that's a place of cheap manufacturing to a border region that's a place of advanced manufacturing, we need to work on human capital. We need to make sure that the skills are there, because companies won't be moving to the border region because of the cheap labor anymore. They'll be moving because there's the right human talent there, and because there's this great way to collaborate between the two sides of the border, the two talent pools that exist right next to each other. But to do that, we need to make sure that those are developed fully, that education is fully out there and taken advantage of. Something that's happening federally between the two governments right now is a big push to increase numbers in terms of educational exchange. That's a great initiative. There have been ambitious goals set. The best place to implement those goals is at the U.S. Mexico border. How expensive is it to have a student come up from Mexico City to study in Pennsylvania for a year? Pretty expensive. How expensive is it for a student from Ciudad Juarez to go to UTEP, the University of Texas, El Paso, and get a full degree? Not very expensive at all, actually. And programs at the state level that allow for in-state tuition, which Texas has helped quite a bit in that direction. But it's something that should really be a focus of our federal efforts to boost education is the border region. It's a great opportunity there. Along the similar lines, building up connections between the private sector, the labor market, and the educational institutions in the region is extremely important. One of the sort of most exciting things that's happening is the development of cross-border or international internship programs. So this is a great example of a good way to have a better connection between what's happening in the business world, in the private sector, and in our educational institutions, is to actually physically connect them. So students are going back and forth between those institutions. There's probably a lot more that can be done there. There are some really good examples in the border region of success there. One that I'm familiar with are the Centers for, the Centers for Research on Advanced Materials. They have one in Monterey and one in Chihuahua. But one of the things that those institutions do that's unique is they're academic institutions. They have professors with PhDs, et cetera, who are doing research on advanced materials, very technical stuff. But they've changed the incentive structure so that if you want to get ahead as a professor, you can't just do your research and get published in prestigious journals. Yes, that's important, and yes, they have to do it. But they have to, in order to get ahead and move up the chain at the university, they have to be doing projects with the private sector that are applied, that are then used in business. It's just a change in the structure of what works in the university there. So that's one example. I think there are probably a million more of what can be done, but that's an important task for the region. And then finally, just very quickly, there's a lot more in the report, and I'm not really an expert on the topic, so I'm not going to go into a ton of detail. But looking at energy and the use of natural resources in the region, energy, there's clearly this major changes underway in the world of energy, and so much of that is happening actually in the border region, whether it's the Eagle Ford shale on the U.S. side of the border, the Mexican energy reform at the federal level, and some of the options that opens up for shale production in northern Mexico, whether this is new energy production in New Mexico with natural gas, or renewable energies in Tamaulipas or Baja California. There are very natural, renewable energy rich region, especially in northern Mexico, and it hasn't been fully taken advantage of. Obviously, there are huge opportunities there, and there are some challenges associated with this development. In a region that's resource scarce in terms of water, in terms of having a delicate natural environment, this needs to be done very carefully in collaboration, discussion with local communities. We think that there's, especially on the Mexican side of the border, a real need to make sure, as the diputada mentioned earlier, that the state and local level governments are involved in conversations with their federal counterparts who really manage the broader energy development strategy for the country, but also on the U.S. side of the border, opportunities for that. And in general, we just think that there needs to be a bigger discussion of what needs to be done to take advantage of opportunities, whether that's human capital development or something else, and also how to do so in a sustainable way, because this is a region that needs to, when it thinks about economic development, it needs to think about sustainability right alongside that, because you can't actually have strong economic development in the long term in a region with scarce natural resources without having a sustainability strategy alongside that. So we think we need to merge those discussions and bring them down to the state and local levels in connection with the federal governments as well. And I'm going to stop right there. Thanks very much for taking this time. I think we're running a little bit over time, but I'd love to, we haven't had a chance to engage the audience yet. Maybe we can take just 2 questions from the audience at once and we'll answer, and then we'll have another chance to do just a little bit of that with our final session with our representatives from the federal government. So we have an opportunity for 1 or 2 questions. Please state your name, brief question please, and then we'll answer.
My name is Clev Mesador. I actually used to work at EDA at the Department of Commerce, and my firm actually represents Borderplex Alliance, which you mentioned, which is doing great things in the border region. I'm curious about border wait times and how much of a priority that is in terms of the conversations and the feedback that folks provided, and what recommendations or insights you got from there.
Sure. Let's take one more question, then we'll answer both of them at the same time, if there is one. Or we'll answer that right up here up front.
Good morning. Thank you for the wonderful information you've provided. My name is Sergio de la Peña. I'm an independent consultant. Perhaps you can address the issue of the drop in oil prices in Mexico obviously are having an impact on the level of exploration and investment that Mexico is going to make. At least that's my assumption. I'd like to know if you could address that issue, and particularly how does the security situation play into exploration some of these remote locations in northern Mexico?
Great. Do you want to tackle any of that?
Good question. I'll jump into border wait times. As you know, thanks for your question. As you know, this is a discussion that has gone on for many years in the border region. It gets very, very heated. There has been an entire methodological debate about how do you measure this? Where exactly in the line do you start measuring? This has finally settled through the efforts of the U.S. Mexico Joint Working Committee, which is headed by state and Mexico's foreign ministry, but really led by the big transportation ministries and the state transportation ministries. We finally have kind of methodological consensus on how to do this. The technology that's being used is RFID technology, and we have some pilot programs. This issue in the border region is absolutely at the top of the agenda. People get really, really irritated when they have to wait in line for multiple hours, both on the passenger side and the pedestrian environment, as well as on the commercial side. And as Chris mentioned, a lot of that has to do with the infrastructure of, some of it has to do with the infrastructure of surface streets, the urban infrastructure on the Mexican side, and a lot of it has to do with staffing levels. And the number of lanes you have and the number of lanes you have open at any one time. So absolutely, this is an issue at the top of the agenda in the border region, and the discussions on this become very, very heated.
On the question about the impact of the reduction of price of oil, I think that at least at the state level, I mean, particularly when you look at states like Texas and New Mexico that are very dependent in many cases on oil revenues for their state budgets, obviously that would affect their ability to support programs, their state budgets. When you look at what states are doing along the border, many of them are either issuing grants for local communities for economic development. So obviously a reduction in the revenue affects their ability to fund those projects. And so that's one impact, and that's true not only of border states, but also states like North Dakota, Montana, and others that are seeing the drop in oil. The other issue, obviously, is as far as what states are doing in this broader furthering the economic relationship between the two countries. If you look at some of the legislation that's been passed at the state level, a lot of them are enabling acts that enable the states to enter into agreements, financing or development agreements for projects within the border. So certainly, those can also be affected by the lack of revenue, because a lot of them also will have to incorporate, there may be some attachment of appropriations to them as well. So, and then to the issue of wait times, obviously it's a huge issue that's common along the U.S. Mexico border. San Diego, particularly Sandig, has been for many years tracking the cost of border wait times and the impact on the local economy on both sides, and it's very tremendous. And it's obviously one that affects. And you look at some of the wait times also of not only vehicles but also pedestrians that have to wait for 2-3 hours on weekends, and obviously that is a huge impact on the ability to move back and forth between the border.
Thanks, Edgar. Yeah, I mean, the one thing I wanted to say is that it's not so simple, though, the impact of energy prices. I mean, on the other hand, there's some discussion, I don't think it's entirely clear yet, but there's some discussion about how falling prices of oil could actually change the natural gas prices and production in a way you wouldn't expect, because oil comes out with natural gas from a lot of the shale resources. And so if it's less, if there's less of an incentive to be extracting that oil, well, then you'll be extracting less natural gas also. And so will natural gas prices actually increase as a result of this? There's some speculation that's a possibility. I think there are some things, but also manufacturing, right? I mean, lower energy costs is a great boon for manufacturing in the region. So you have those positive impacts in terms of what will be happening in terms of manufacturing, mixed with some of the negative impacts on state budgets, on federal budgets, the challenges of, for Mexico, I think one of the big questions is when will production start from the shale resources in northern Mexico? But that's linked to when will there be additional transportation to import from the United States. And some of that's coming online already, actually. Some of that, there's a big Los Ramones pipeline that's being built and is actually pretty close to second stage completion. that will actually allow for greater imports from the U.S. to Mexico. So, there are a lot of factors I think that are in play, and falling energy prices are one of them. But even they will have a mixed response, I think, to the region. And then the one other thing on wait time, I mean, you all have spoken to the wait times themselves, but one thing that we mentioned in the report that I think is worth calling out again is we need better data about the wait times. We need clear data that's measured in the same way across the entire U.S. Mexico border, and there have been some steps towards that, but we're really not there yet. And then we need to make that data available to everyone, everywhere. And there's some unique, interesting ideas on how to incorporate that into the process out in California right now, with possibly even changing pricing depending on what wait times look like at other ports of entry, because that would, it's basically using tolls as a way to control flows and move them between ports of entry, so you're fully utilizing everything. But also just helping individuals make decisions. Should I go to Home Depot now or in 2 hours? So let's make sure everybody has all that information so they can make good decisions at the border. And unfortunately, we're not quite there yet. Thank you all so much. Sorry to keep it short. I have this tendency to pack programs, maybe overpack them, some would say. But we have so many great speakers here that I want to keep things moving along. Thanks to Eric and to Edgar for being here today with us. And we're going to switch up to our next panel. Thank you very much. We have a really good web audience, I should actually say. We have a lot of folks. Yeah, later we'll be able to tell that, but I just knew ahead of time.
I had my whole staff log on.
Good, you're boosting our numbers. You guys can just take these 2 spots. I think we have some name tents. They're just getting them out for you.
Name tents too?
Yeah, they're coming. Thank you guys very much. So last but certainly not least, we have, we obviously already had Beth Hogan from USAID to give us part of the federal perspective, but now we're able to have a sort of binational, federal to federal conversation about some of the interesting things, because as she already mentioned, there's a lot going on at the federal level connected to the border region and economically in particular. And so we're delighted to have with us from the Mexican Embassy, Antonio Ortiz Mena, who's head of the economic section at the embassy. He's also an academic, so he speaks both of our languages, as we try to do here at the Wilson Center as well. Worked at CIDE in Mexico City for a number of years and has been at the embassy for quite a long time following these issues and working to advance them. So thanks a lot for coming today, Antonio.
Thanks a lot, Chris, and congratulations to you and for your colleagues for this long-standing work. It's been a long time coming, and you've been perseverant.
Thanks very much.
And doing this, I don't know if you've done so well that you have a think tank named after you, the Wilson Center.
That's right. One day I will lead this.
Yeah, that's right. So
let me just introduce Sue, if you don't mind,
yes,
also, and
okay.
then we'll go. Okay. It'll make it more dynamic later on. But Sue Sarnio also is with us today. She's a deputy assistant secretary in the Bureau of the Western Hemisphere of the Department of State. She's had a long trajectory at the Department of State, has worked across the world, but has worked very specifically in the hemisphere for a while, and worked specifically on Canada for a long time, which is a great experience to take to this U.S. Mexico relationship, because too often I think just as we often say that between San Diego and Brownsville and El Paso, they don't speak to each other enough. The same can be said about the folks who are working on border issues and economic development issues with the U.S.-Canada relationship and the U.S.-Mexico relationship. And so it's great to have someone like you who can help call out some of those things. But thanks to you also for being with us here today. We'll go back to Antonio. You guys can each make some opening remarks, and then we'll have a chance for a little discussion.
Yes, absolutely. So again, thanks a lot. It's great here to be with Sue, and we do engage a lot constructively. So we, at least these 2 folks from federal agencies, do engage a lot, right?
Sometimes our other agencies less so.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, what I wanted to do in these opening comments is just to bring some context to the discussion of border issues. I think it's important to keep in mind that the border unites us, but the bottom line is that we share an economic space, and we have to reduce what economists boringly call transaction costs to trade and investment flows, and to facilitate the legitimate movement of people across borders to boost economic growth and boost job creation and just the well-being of citizens on both sides of the border. I mean, it's as simple or as complex as that. The border plays an absolutely key role in that regard, but it's important to keep the big picture in mind. So I want to mention some of the initiatives that are being pursued at the federal level that have a close bearing on what happens at the border. The HLED has already been mentioned, the high-level economic dialogue, and at the dialogue we're pursuing some initiatives that have a direct bearing on the border. We're focusing on what we call strategic logistics corridors. Mexico and the U.S. not only sell to each other, but we produce goods together, as a publication from Chris Wilson shows. You can give some advertisement for that other publication. And that means we need a seamless border. And we have industrial clusters along the border, but also inside the U.S. and inside Mexico. And we have to make sure that they're very well connected in order to make the most out of our competitive advantage. So we're working on those strategic logistics corridors, and specifically on border issues. Two of our agencies, our Customs Agency and CBP, have worked together to successfully establish a northbound single rail manifest. And this year they will also implement a single cargo manifest. This is very important because rail will play an increasing role in cross-border transportation, not only truck. And that's something we need to think about when we're thinking about doing the crossings that we need in the future, not the crossings that we need right now. And talking about land crossings, I think it's important also to talk about recent advances in a long-standing issue between Mexico and the U.S., and that had to do with a cross-border trucking dispute. And we had a pilot program that successfully concluded last October, if I recall correctly. And the Mexican motor carriers are now being able to request permits to enter into the U.S., and DOT will process those permits. And through that pilot program, it was shown that Mexican carriers can and do operate throughout the U.S. at a safety level equivalent to the U.S. and Canada, and meet with the very high safety standards of the FMCSA. So that's a very important news for cross-border crossings. In terms, again, of the HLED and international connectivity, I want to mention bilateral aviation agreement that was concluded late last year. Of course, airplanes fly across the border, and that agreement contemplates much more flexibility for both passengers and cargo. The agreement still has to be ratified by the Mexican Congress, but I think it will greatly enhance connectivity between both of our countries. We also have an initiative called MUSAIC, which is the Mexico-U.S. Entrepreneurship and Innovation Council, which is helping SMEs on both sides of the border. I believe SMEs were mentioned by the representative from USAID. So we have some very interesting initiatives through MUSAIC, and human capital was also mentioned as key for the future of the development of the border region. And for the development of the human capital, we have the Bilateral Forum on Higher Education, Innovation, and Research, what we call FOBESI. That's its Spanish acronym. And maybe, Sue, if you want to mention the FOBESI, or? No. Okay.
It's an acronym, not an acronym.
Sorry, an acronym. Yeah, an acronym. And we're we're fostering educational exchanges and the type of training that's required by companies in Mexico and in the U.S. I also want to mention in these opening remarks some recent interesting developments with a North American Development Bank. I don't know if I missed it, but I don't think I heard the word NADBank. No?
Very briefly.
Very briefly. Very briefly.
It's a very important
Yeah,
institution.
but it's a very, very important binational institution that has been working for a number of years doing projects along the border, mainly on environmentally related issues. And earlier this year in January, the board of directors of NADBank, I have a member of the board of directors of NADBank very close by to me, announced the support of the governments of the U.S. and Mexico for a general capital increase of $3 billion. The amount has to be apportioned by both governments over a period of 5 years and would include $450 million of paid-in capital and the rest in callable capital. The respective legislatures in each country still have to approve this, but this would be the first capital increase of NADBank since its inception over 20 years ago. So this will be absolutely critically important. I also would like to make some comments or ask a question to the authors of the report. I see that there are 27 recommendations to improve the border. It reminds me of the Paul Simon's on 50 ways to leave your lover. I don't know if you'll put some music to 27 ways to improve the border. But anyway,
music video is next.
Yeah, you have now that you're gonna do the music video. But I don't know if you have a sense of which recommendations you would suggest as absolute priorities, because you have a list of 27. It's difficult to know exactly where to start. So if you can think about those recommendations in terms of where would you get more bang for the buck, and if there's a sequence where you start, where would you go after, I think that would be very welcome by the governments. If you could do a sequence or rank them by bang for the buck,
okay.
That would be most welcome. And in terms of the very interesting list of border crossings, something similar I think would be also highly useful. Some people have been speaking about the need to have some ports of entry open 24/7. But of course, you need to make it worth their while for companies to use those borders and for both governments to staff those ports of entry, right? So I guess you need to follow the money again to see where it makes sense to have those 24/7 border crossings opening, just as an example. And I'll leave my opening remarks here. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Antonio. Sue?
Yeah, thank you. The great thing about being the last speaker is that you can throw out all your prepared notes because everybody said everything, and you can just kind of ad-lib. So I'll just give you some observations. And first of all, I just have to say I'm a big fan of the Wilson Institute and Canada Institute, Mexico Institute, Duncan, Chris, Eric, you guys have done a great job on this stuff, and you do a great job all year round, advancing the public discourse on our Mexico and Canada issues, and we just thank you for that. Those of us who sit in the government, we're so busy sort of dealing with the crisis of the day that we don't have the luxury of sitting back and thinking long term about these big issues. So we really appreciate that you've taken the time and put the effort into, going to the border and talking to folks and working on this. And I want you to know we do listen to you, and we do look at, we do read the observations. We do look at them when we're sitting back, when we get requests from our bosses to think big and think bold. We go, okay, where are the new ideas? And we go and we look at your 27 ideas, and we say, these are things we can do, these are things we can't. I asked our Mexico desk to take a look at the recommendations, and I said, does anybody have any heartburn with any of these? And I think we all think that they're all, pretty good ideas. Some of them are harder to carry out than others. Sure. But I think you've really hit on the key points, and I congratulate you on that. Just to reassure you that we do listen to the think tanks. I don't know if I dare mention in this room another think tank, but the Council on Foreign Relations earlier this year recommended that we spend more time looking at North America and the North American as a construct. And I just want to assure you that we do, and we did, because we invited the foreign ministers of Mexico and Canada to Boston over the weekend with Secretary Kerry. And I was up there for the meetings, and it's really remarkable to see when you get your leaders together to talk about the global issues that we're confronting, how much cohesion there is in the thinking of our leaders in the hemisphere. And I think it's safe to predict that you're going to see more of sort of a North America caucus as we go and try to deal with the global issues, climate change and regional issues. As we're going into the Summit of the Americas, I think you'll see more of a North American approach. And also, even on the global issues like confronting Ebola in other continents, our leaders talked about those issues and how we can do these things together, and what we've learned from our North American initiatives on pandemics, and how do we translate that into dealing with the other parts of the problems in other parts of the world, and how we can use that expertise. So I think we do listen to your advice, and we'll be following up, I'm sure. I would just say from the State Department's perspective, it's sort of my job to sort of keep Mexico in perspective with the rest of the world. And, we talk about the Mexican economy, but when we try to stress the importance of North American trade, we try to tell folks that we sell more, we export more to Mexico than we do to Brazil, Russia, India, and China combined. And while those numbers are going to change as the Chinese market grows and the Indian market grows, we still are seeing growth in the Mexican and Canadian trade too. So, I think we need to, those of us who look at Mexico and focus on Mexico and Canada, let's keep folks focused on that and keep it in perspective, because it's easy to get distracted and go, ooh, look at China, big numbers, ooh, India, big numbers, but we still have to remember the neighborhood and keep in mind that these are our biggest trading partners and likely will continue to be. I think your focus on the borders is spot on. I think it's critical. The borders are where our bilateral relationships meet. We can talk Washington, D.C., and we can talk Mexico City, and we can talk Washington, D.C. and Ottawa, but if we don't get the border right, we just get in the way. The business community, I've always believed the business community was far ahead of us. And if you look at the auto sector, or if you look at the aerospace sector, they're working smoothly. They're in sync, and they're working together. The big companies out there, they know they're working where the capital goes to where the markets are, right? And governments are always sort of trudging along trying to catch up and keep up. And I do think Antonio's right about the border efficiencies. We have to get the regulatory structures right. We have to get the border structures right, because if we don't get that right, it adds to the cost of production, and we can't keep North America competitive in the Asia markets and the European markets. We just have to. I would just flag a couple things quickly on what the points I thought that were the best suggestions. I think we definitely have to focus on the trusted trader, trusted traveler programs. I think we've had a lot of success with the Nexus program on the Canadian border, Sentry on the Mexican border. I think we're at 1 million plus members in Canada on the Nexus program. It's hugely successful in sort of getting the average traveler through, leaving I think the way the Department of Homeland Security looks at it is you've got the needle in the haystack. If you make the haystack smaller by putting people you trust going through faster, it's much better. I think Sentry, we're only up around 400,000 right now from your chart. I think your chart was around 350. I think we're up about 412,000 was the last figure I saw. But I think we should be talking that up as you're going out to the border places. Please talk up the Sentry program, because the more trusted travelers we can identify, the more trusted traders we can get into the CTPAT programs, the faster the goods move, the faster the people move. I think your report on the regional focus, regional mechanisms is very good. I would, from my Canada experience, recommend that you also look at, there's a really good organization in the Pacific Northwest called PENWAR, which has a phenomenal model, and we actually have financial support from state legislatures, and I think that they have buy-in from the states, and they've just grown and grown. And when we say, who do we call when we want to talk to the Pacific Northwest, we can call PENWAR and talk to them. There's a sort of a startup group in the Great Lakes, the Council of the Great Lakes Regions, that's trying to adopt a similar model. So I think those are two models you can look at as you're looking at building your organizations. Border governors, I'm a little bit more skeptical on those. I think you have problems getting them together. You have problems. It's hard enough to get one governor in one place, when you talk about getting 10, or if you talk about getting northern governors and the premiers together, sometimes they have different political parties, sometimes they have different spats on their own borders. I think it's a little harder to get them together, and they all want to be the center of attention. So, you get that many egos in one room. No offense to the governors, but I'm not sure. Pushing that one might be a little harder uphill battle. And that may have more to do with politics on the U.S. side of the border than anything else. But the other thing that I think you mentioned, NADBank, that's good. We got Mosaic and Fobesi mentioned. I should mention that besides the high-level economic dialogue, we also have the 21st Century Border Management Initiative, which was more than just words. We've got groups that meet all the time throughout the year on the border. We have a similar Beyond the Border initiative on the Canadian border. We also have the binational bridges and border crossing groups. We have, I think, 3 folks from our Mexico desk are now heading down to meetings this week on Texas and New Mexico region, and they spend a lot of time. That's where we actually get at the nuts and bolts, the really technical. Why can't we get this VACUS machine moved to get this thing going faster? And the high-level economic dialogue has brought high-level attention to it. But I often say that sometimes what we really need are the low-level groups to meet, because the low-level people are the people that actually can, get the ball ahead. You might have it helps when you have a member of the U.S. cabinet calling and saying, can you get that thing rolling? But it's really the people at the working level who work with folks at the state and local level who, move the ball ahead when there's problems. So I think those groups are things that, we need to, don't forget that we have those and we can use those to address the issues. And with that, I'll stop. You wanted to have some time for questions?
Yeah,
and
I think we're running out of time, so if it's okay with you all, we can maybe go to the audience actually, and give them a chance to ask another couple of questions. We'll take another 2 and then go back to the panel for some concluding remarks. We've run out of questions. Here we are. This is actually Rob Donnelly, who was a predecessor in a position working here at the Mexico Institute years ago, doing work on borders for a long time. So it's good to see you back here, Rob.
Is life after that?
Chris. This kind of follows up, I guess, a question from the last panel about cyclical market forces. The last question mentioned the drop in oil prices, and Chris mentioned the impact that could have on natural gas prices. I was curious about the value of the peso and what the panel or anybody else might think the peso's value could have on manufacturing exports from the border. Thanks.
Thanks. Maybe we can take one more question if that's okay. Or there was another one. Well, let me actually hear Miguel in the middle.
Hi, Miguel Aguirre, San Isidro property owner at the port of entry. I just want to make a comment on your comment about, first of all, maybe taking more of a global North America perspective, yet not really seeing the benefit or how the 10-state governor board legislative and conference would be instrumental in supporting that North American perspective. I think that's the two are opposed to one another.
Do you want me to take that one first, and then you can do
Sure,
the
please. And actually, just to mention that Miguel actually, in addition to being an owner of some property and working right at the border at San Isidro, joined us at all 4 of our forums last year on the border. He actually traveled. We started in San Diego, and so he got involved then and has actually joined us in all of them, and now here in D.C. So thanks for coming today also, Miguel. But yeah, sure, let's, Sue, would you go first? And can I just put one more final issue on the table if you guys could respond to? I saw part of the HLAD statement this year is about stakeholder engagement and the importance of it. And I think you've already sort of talked about that in saying that sometimes the business community is ahead in terms of what they're pushing for. But can you just talk a little bit about what that means to involve stakeholders in this process of strengthening U.S. Mexico economic relationship?
Okay. Do you want to do the governors?
Yeah, let me just do I think the governor's question. I hope you don't misunderstand me. I would love to see the border governors get together, monthly and discuss issues. I just think because of domestic politics sometimes that's harder to get them in the same room. And I think it's any of us who schedule events and trying to get try to get 3 foreign ministers in the same city in the same continent was hard enough. You try to get 3 governors or 10 governors together on the same date and get them to agree to talk about issues. It's just a real scheduling difficulty, if nothing else. So I think it's worth trying to do, and it's worth trying to make it happen. But I think sometimes there are understandable reasons why it can't happen. And I don't think that detracts at all from the whole idea of pushing North America. I don't think anybody's ever tried to get the North American governors and premiers all together. That would be a interesting thing to try. Maybe somebody'd be interested enough in doing that. If you scheduled it in San Diego in winter, maybe you might be able to get it to happen.
I think there's actually an effort underway right now. So we'll see if it actualizes this fall. But there's an effort to do just that, which would be a first, as you mentioned.
Do you want to answer the peso question?
Yes, I'll be glad to answer the Paso question. I've been at the Mexican Embassy here in D.C. for about 8 years, and throughout that time, I've received any number of U.S. company representatives, either they already have investments in Mexico or they're interested in investing in Mexico. And to be frank, the exchange rate issue has not come up in the conversation at all. Their basic concerns have to do with wait times at the border, with infrastructure, with connectivity, with regulations. The cost of energy has been an issue. So they take a look at many factors. And I think that Duncan was about to ask a question. I'll answer the question he has not asked. How about that, Duncan? That's right. And energy was mentioned, in fact, a number of times, both by the representative from the state of Nuevo León and from other folks. And I think that the border has a huge potential in terms of energy, and that the development of energy along the border can also benefit, manufacturing. You also mentioned this, and I will come back to the HLED. I think that one of the most salient things from the January 6th HLED meeting here in D.C. was the inclusion of energy as part of the high-level economic dialogue. So what we agreed to is to add energy and climate change to the HLED work plan, and the U.S. and Mexico will enhance communication and collaboration between the energy agencies in both governments. We will work on facilitating the cross-border flow of energy-related equipment. I mean, this has to do with infrastructure, with rules. This is very, very important. And create a binational business-to-business energy council and increase regulatory cooperation on energy. So I think this is very, very important. And close links with business here will be very salient. And here, given that Sue mentioned the CFR report, here I also want to briefly mention the work that's being done by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce through the Mexico-USCO dialogue. They had a meeting late last year in Monterrey. They also issued a number of recommendations. Some of them have a bearing on the border. So we listen to them, we greatly value them, and we are always open to engaging with stakeholders. And I'll also ask sort of a rhetorical question. In the 27 recommendations, it says, a lot of verbs: strengthen, utilize, expand. Who are you talking to? Is it the federal governments? Is it the state government? Is it the local governments? Business? I think all of the above.
You're right.
So,
exactly. All of the above. That's the response, is that it's absolutely all of the above, because I think that's one of the keys here, is that it takes action at all of these levels. It takes action across all of these agencies that were in the room at the HLAD meeting that Ms. Hogan mentioned. It takes all of us, and even us outside of government. I think we have to take some responsibility for the way things look at the U.S. Mexico border. Yeah. Thanks.
I could just say one more thing on the stakeholders. And I think in the Mexico, North America context, we're very lucky. Our stakeholders are not shy, and they're often very vocal and tell us what they think about how we're doing. So we do hear it. But I do think I think we need to be a little more creative on how we do this. If we need, as a government, we need to we want public comments. What can we do better on the border? And we publish a Federal Register notice, and anybody who's sitting around bored enough to read the Federal Register will say, okay, I'll write comments, and they'll submit them in. This organization on the Canadian border that I mentioned, PENWAR, can be, private organizations can be a lot more creative. They, when we issued a call for comments on the U.S.-Canada border, Penwar actually put up like a crowdsourcing site, and they asked people to put up ideas, and then people voted on what's the most important to you. We got some of the best ideas we got on the northern border came out of Penwar's suggestions that were on the internet. And I have to say, the private sector can, in groups like that, can do things that from the stakeholder perspective that governments can't do when we have to sit down and take stodgy written reports from everybody and hold public hearings and do that. I think we need to get more creative on that. And I don't know if you saw recently, the Canadian American Business Council has recommended a hackathon that we get together and we just brainstorm and get the brightest people in the room and hack out the best ideas on borders and how do we make them more efficient. And I think that's a really good idea. I think they're probably waiting for the government to do it. And my suggestion to you would be just don't wait for the government to do it. If you have ideas out there and things you can do, get them organized and get them out there, and we'll come. We'll listen and we'll do what we can to. You're our clients, right? We're the people who use the border every day, the businesses who run across the border, people who cross the border. You're the people we're trying to serve. So let us know.
Thanks very much. Thanks so much for both of your participation today. Thanks to all of our panelists. Thanks to you, the audience. I know we also have a big web audience that's out there today, so thanks to all of you who are tuning in to watch. Yeah, this has been fantastic. Really appreciate all your participation.
It's a pleasure to do panels with you. We should
Panels,
do more.
yeah. We should
But
do
we
more.
should we should actually get together.
No, but I think we should.
Great, good.